and sunshine now. Open up your soul and make your life find sunshine now. Can you understand? Do you understand? Can you understand? Do you understand?
Welcome again to our SAT prep course. Today we return to the issue of math on the SAT. Be careful. If you're good with math, remember the SAT math is not all about math. And if your math skills are not so great, remember this. The majority of math questions on the SAT require only a knowledge of math that you had before the 8th grade. What makes the math sections hard is not the math. The English on the math is hard to understand and the questions are very tricky. Not very mathematical, very tricky though. Remember that all SATs will consist of 10 sections. You'll have 3 math sections, 3 reading sections, 3 writing sections, and an experimental section. The experimental section will not count toward your actual SAT score. The SAT people use the experimental section to evaluate the validity of future SAT questions. Do not attempt to guess which sections of the SAT are experimental and which are not. It doesn't really serve any purpose. Out of the 3 math sections, probably the last math test you'll take is a 16-question, 20-minute test. It appears generally around sections 7, 8, or 9. We've already discussed the 18-question test. The 18-question test generally appears from section 2 to section 6. Somewhere around there. It's 25 minutes and it has the student response questions. Those are the ones that you grid in. They're not the 5-choice type of questions that are typical of most SAT questions. Today we will be reviewing section 6, the math. It's a 25-minute test and it has 25 questions. All questions are 5-choice. You have to choose between A, B, C, and D. Let's begin. This is number 1. As we have discussed before, the earlier on the math test, generally speaking, the easier it is. There's some differences on the 18-question test, but on the 20-question test, number 1 will be very easy, number 20 will be very hard. Indeed, questions number 1 through 4 were level 1 in difficulty, so they're quite easy. You can read this. If 5 more than x is equal to 10, what is the value of x? This is a very simple question, and you probably wouldn't even have to use algebra in order to solve it. However, because the algebra is so simple, we'll do it. 5 more than x is equal to 10 merely means x plus 5 equals 10. You can see from this that the correct choice is choice D, 5. Very simple. Let's go on to number 2. Number 2 is a difficult level 2 question. It's also geometry, very simple. You need to know that in any straight line you have 180 degrees. So next to that 120 degree inside of the triangle, you actually have a 60-degree angle. Now, if you know that, you should also know that every triangle has 180 degrees. In other words, you know the top angle is 80. We've just decided that the angle on the right is 60. That's 140 degrees. So since all 3 of those have to add up to 180, x degrees has to in fact be 40 degrees. Now some of you who know math know that there's a geometric formula that could have solved that a little bit faster. The remote interior degrees of a triangle is equal to the exterior degree. In other words, x plus 80 will in fact have to equal 120. If you knew that, you could have gotten this answer a little bit quicker. All in all, it's quite simple. By the way, you should always check the geometry questions with the reality principle. Remember that geometry problems are drawn to scale unless they say they're not drawn to scale. Does this in fact look as though x is 40 degrees? It does. It's a quick check. You should always do that though. Let's go on to number 3.
Make your lifetime sunshine now. Open up your soul and make your lifetime sunshine now. Can you understand? Do you understand?
The SAT people like graphs and diagrams. They put a lot of these on the easier problems. Remember, this is a level difficulty 1. It's only a question number 3 though, so that shouldn't be a surprise. In this particular case, they're giving you a chart, and they're also testing whether you know certain mathematical definitions. In this particular case, you need to know what is a median. A median involves a list of numbers. The median would be merely the thing that falls in the middle. It has nothing to do with adding things or subtracting things. It just has to do with what is in the middle. Because there are 9 items here, the thing in the middle would be the 5th item. There's 4 before that, there's 4 after that. The middle one would be the middle or medium number. I've reordered the numbers here so you can see that, but you really wouldn't have to do that. You've got 10, 12, 20, 21, 25, 28, 28, 36, and 39. The thing that falls in the middle is the medium, and that would be 25. Note that you also have to know what the mode is. The mode is just the most common item. If you notice on this list, the only thing that shows up more often than once is 28, so the mode would be 28. And you also have to figure out what the average is. On the SAT, they call that the arithmetic mean. You would have to add all of these items up and divide it by 9 in order to get the average. So this was easy. All you had to do was look at the list, order it in the correct fashion, and find out the answer is, in fact, choice A.
Make your lifetime sunshine now. Open up your soul and make your lifetime sunshine now.
Number 4 is the last of our very, very easy questions. These have all been level 1s. They're wanting to know if you understand the concept of even and odd numbers. Even numbers are numbers such as 2 or anything that's divisible by 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so forth. Odds are all the integers that are not divisible by 2. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so forth. You can just substitute those numbers in order to figure this out. I don't really see the practicality of knowing any mathematics beyond just using these examples. Choice A says 1 even and 2 odd, so that could be, the even could be a 2, the odds could be a 1. If you add 2 plus 1 plus 1, you get 4. That doesn't work. 2 even numbers such as 2 plus 2 will equal 4. That doesn't work. Remember, you're trying to find an odd number. 3 even numbers, 2 plus 2 plus 2 would be 6. That doesn't work. D, 3 odd numbers, that would be something like 1 plus 1 plus 1. That's 3. That works, so that's probably going to be the answer. You can keep going to double check to make sure that you can eliminate E. 4 odd numbers would be 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, which is 4, which doesn't work. So indeed, the correct answer has to be D. Let's go on to something slightly more complicated, number 5. Number 5 is our first of the totally unmathematical type questions. This is a frequent occurrence on the simpler SAT problems, and oddly enough, some of the most difficult ones. In this particular case, they said that you had a bunch of stars, and they've given you 4 stars that you can see there quite easily, and they said the perimeter was 24. Well, if you notice, each star is composed of 8 sides. You can count them. Some students actually figured out what each side is worth. Since the total is 24, you could divide that by 8 and get an answer of 3. So in other words, AB is 3. That wasn't really necessary because you know that the 8 sides is equal to 24, and the perimeter of the shaded region, if you count it, has 8 sides. 8 sides is 24. You already established that. You really didn't have to do any math here. So the answer there is quite simply E. Number 6 was a level 2, although I thought it might be a little bit more difficult than that, but I think most people sorted through this and got it correct. They're giving you a combination of variables x, y, and z, and they're giving you certain values on those variables, and you're having to figure out what the value of x, y, and z in itself is. There's two ways you can approach this. You could approach it in, first, a very mathematical way. For example, you could start off by saying xy times xz times yz is 5 times 10 times 2. That's sort of just extrapolating from the information. And you can then put that all together to say that xy times xz times yz equals 100, because 5 times 10 times 2 equals 100. If you notice on the left side of the equation, that actually forms x squared, y squared, and z squared, which equals 100. And finally, if you root both sides of the equation, ooh, we're getting really mathematical, aren't we? If you root both sides of the equation, you get x, y, z equals 10. And that's purely the algebraic way of doing it. There's another way of doing it also. You can start with the equation that they gave you, that xy equals 5 and xz equals 10, and substitute things that work. It doesn't take a whole lot of work to figure out something very easy to figure out there. You can make x a 5. If x is a 5, then y has to be a 1, and that's certainly true. Now we've already established that x is a 5, so we can't change that around. So in x times z equals 10, we have to make x a 5, and therefore z has to be a 2. So we've established that. And the last equation, yz equals 2, well, we've already said that z is a 2. We can't change that around, so that forces the y to be a 1. Now, if you put all of that information together, you get x, y, and z equaling 5 times 1 times 2, which, not too mysteriously, also equals 10. That's called the process of substitution. That works on easy problems. It might be actually better to use that on the really hard algebraic problems. Either of those would have worked. You could have done that algebraically or non-algebraically. Let's go to the next problem. Number 7 is the last of our level 2s. It looks complicated because it's written in form of a function, but if you read it and read it carefully, you'll notice that they say that L is the woman's foot length, and they told you what the foot length was. It was 9.3 inches. So if we take their function, the S of L equals 3 times L minus 20.5, all we really have to do is substitute the 3L with the 9.3. It's very, very simple. Just substitute what they told you, L, the length, with 9.3, which they told you. Now, that turns from S of L equals 3 times 9.3 minus 20.5 to S of L equals 27.9 minus 20.5, and that clearly just changes into S of L equals 7.4. Now, a small issue at this point. 7.4 is not listed there, but if you notice, they use the word approximate. Which one of these is the closest to shoe size? Is it 7.5 or is it 7? Well, 7.4 is very close to 7.5, which is 7.5. So indeed, the correct answer is 7.5. It looks complicated. It really isn't. It's just simple multiplication and subtraction, and a little bit of English. Question number 8 is our first geometry question that involves any level of difficulty. We had an easier one before. This is a level 3. It's considered intermediate in difficulty. They tell you that ST, and you can see ST in the picture above, is 3 times RS. The first thing you should think about, does that look about right? Well, yeah, ST does look 3 times bigger than RS, so that makes sense. And then they tell you that the coordinates of S are -3 and then some magical thing called K. Well, we talked about coordinates in previous lectures. Coordinates are just lefty, righty, uppy, downy things. The first thing is the lefty, righty thing. If it's a -3, it means it goes from the origin, that's where the 0 is, to the left 3 spaces. You walk off 3 paces, 1, 2, 3, and you're at R. And you're at S. It's the same length left to right. So you're going to the left 3. Now if you know that 0 to R is 3, you know that S to T is also 3. So that tells us the length is 3. Remember, you can't have negative lengths, so the length of ST has to be 3. Now, if ST is 3 times as much as RS, well, that doesn't really take a lot of math. We can tell that RS indeed has to be a length of 1. So S to R is 1, the origin to T is 1, S to T is 3, R to the origin, or 0, is 3. All makes good sense. They're wanting the value of K. Well, K represented that coordinate of S. We know it's over a -3. How much up did you have to go? Well, you had to go 1 up. So clearly K is a +1. Fairly simple, nothing magical. It's drawn to scale. It looks correct. The answer is C.
Your head explodes without proposed. I'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
Number 9 is a very simple question. You should be somewhat familiar with circle graphs. Circle graphs just give you a proportion of an item. The whole circle represents 100%. Half a circle would represent 50%. So it's fairly easy to figure out what 20% is. I suppose the best way of thinking about it is think of a whole circle as 100%, half a circle as 50%, and 1/4 of a circle as 25%. I've shown a picture of 25%. The darkened portion of this circle is 25%. Now compare it to the countries they have listed. China and the rest of the world are clearly more than the quarter circle, more than 25%. Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the United States are clearly much less than 25%. India is a little bit less than 25%, therefore it makes sense that that's the correct answer, and indeed India, choice C, was the correct answer.
Open up your life and make your lifetime sunshine now. Open up your soul and make your lifeline sunshine now. Can you understand? You understand? Can you understand? You understand?
In number 10, the major issue is just reading it, making sure that you understand some of the weird English here. The math is rather simple because you can look at choices A, B, C, D, and E and look and find out what is the length, L, and what's the width, the W. For example, in choice A, you know the length is 36 and the width is 1, so using that formula that they gave you, the 2LW over L squared plus W squared, you end up with 2 times 36 times 11 over the 36 squared plus the 1 squared. If you work all that out, you get some amazingly odd fraction. 72 over 1,297. Just doing it in my head, it's about 0.05 something, so it's very, very small. You could convert that into a decimal if you want, but it's really, you can look at it and tell that it's not anywhere close to 0.75 or 3/4. Remember, 0.75 and 3/4 are the same number. You should be fairly familiar with common decimal equivalents. For example, 0.2 is 1/5, 20% is 1/5, 0.25 or 25% is 1/4, 50% is 1/2, 3/4 is 75% or 0.75. I myself, I think, would recommend that you make it a point to remember even the little bit odd ones, such as 1/8, which is 12.5% or 0.125, and so forth. Try to remember those if you can. If you can't, you can plug them into your calculators, but it'll take you a little bit longer to answer the questions. Doing the same process on the other choices, you get a fairly easy answer. B, you end up with 72. As a matter of fact, all the numerators are going to be 72 because it's basically the same in the numerator, 2 times the length times the width on all of them. And all of them end up being 36. So 36 times 2 is 72. So choice B is 72 over 398. You can put that in your calculator. You'll get something a little less than 20%, a little less than 0.2. That's not close to 3/4. Next, choice C, you end up with 72 over 153, still less than half. The way I do it is 72 and 72 is 144. So 72 over 153 is clearly less than 1/2. Choice D, you do all the work, you get 72 over 97. That sounds pretty good. And E, you end up with 72 over 72, which is 1. No, we're close. So the answer is probably D. In fact, if you convert D, 72 over 97, you're going to get something pretty close to 0.75. It's not going to be exact, but it's the closest one. And indeed, choice D is the answer. The only point with number 10 is not the math. The math is relatively simple. There's a little bit of a difficulty in the English, and it's a time burner. You need to be really familiar with fractions in order to exclude some of the silly things like A and E. They're totally silly. So the more you can feel comfortable with fractions and their decimal equivalents, the faster you're going to do this. The actual math is quite simple. Let's go on to number 11.
It's gonna night to knock either down.